So, today I'm going to show you how the book Problems and Solution works. My book, which I wrote for those of you taking the IELTS, okay? I've already shown the opinion one, the both views one, the advantages and disadvantages one, and today I'll show the problem and solution one. Of course, a bit later on, I'll talk a little more about what's inside, right? But first, I want to show you how the book actually works. Let's check it out together, shall we? I want you to understand the logic, not just memorize the structures. Introduction of the book. How should you approach writing? Here in the introduction, I already mentioned this. How you should approach writing. Right at the beginning of the book, I make one thing very clear. Writing is not a talent, it's a technique. And a lot of people come to IELTS thinking they write poorly, when in fact they just don't know how to organize ideas the way the examiner expects. And that's exactly what the introduction addresses, as you can see. Here I explain why the problem, solution, and say tasks appear so often in IELTS, why they intimidate students, and how writing improves. When you understand what to write, when to write it, and why to write it. So, my friends, my students, the idea is not to write beautifully, but to write correctly for the exam. Still in chapter 1, what exactly is a problem, solution, and say? Here I show what problem, solution, and say are. That's on pages 4 and 5. Before anything else, I want you to understand that this book was carefully designed. I explain the purpose of the book. It's not just a reading, but a guided course on writing task 2, focused on problem, solutions, and 6. Okay? And here I make it clear that writing is a trainable skill. No one is born knowing how to write for the IELTS. And that organization, more clarity is worth more than fancy vocabulary. That's on pages 4 and 5. On pages 6 and 7, still in chapter 1, I explain what characterizes this type of essay. Here, the student learns that it's not enough to just mention a problem. You need to explain why it exists and suggest viable solutions, not generic ideas. I also explain, still on pages 6 and 7, why this type of essay appears so often in the IELTS and how it tests critical thinking, something essential for Band 7 and above. On page 8, I present the classic structure of the problem-solution essay. The structure itself: introduction, body paragraph for problems, body paragraph for solutions, and conclusion. Here, the student already starts to understand what goes in each paragraph with simple and straightforward examples. From page 9 to page 11, we start here. I specialize in teaching what I call the DRW method. The D stands for clearly defining the problem. The R represents identifying the underlying reasons. And finally, the W is for finding effective ways to solve it. This method effectively prevents the occurrence of repetition, disorganized or confusing paragraphs, and the mixing of ideas. And it assists the student in learning to write in a logical, clear way. This is precisely the standard that the examiner expects to see. If you take a look at the information presented on pages 12 and 13 of chapter 4, actually, I am very sorry, I meant to say pages 12 and 13, which are still located within the section for chapter 3. On this page, the student finds a complete essay module. Here is the essay module. As you can see, decline interesting. So it's talking about the teacher who no longer wants to be a teacher because of the salary. Very interesting. And how do we solve this problem? It's a model. This text serves as a reference for structure, language, and development of ideas. Right after, on the following pages, I start preparing the student to analyze this essay, not just read it, but actually analyze it, which would already be in chapter 4 from page 13 to page 16. The focus is vocabulary. Here, starting from this page, the focus is vocabulary. Take a look. It's very interesting. Here, there are several collocations in the field of education and society. Here, the student learns real IELTS collocations, so they don't just say or write whatever comes to mind, but instead write academically verbs and expressions for problems, specific vocabulary for solutions, all organized without random lists. And it goes on, okay? And of course, there are exercises, and the answers are at the end of the book. You do everything yourself. Let's go to the page here, more exercises, and we'll get to page 22. On page 22, between pages 22 and 32, I work intensively on linking words, dividing them by function. Contrast, although, however, and nonetheless, and for cause and effect, due to, therefore, as a result. Here I explain the correct structure, give examples, and point out common mistakes that lower your score. This part is crucial for coherence and cohesion. The score for coherence and cohesion is based on all of that section there, and it goes up to page 32 with exercises. And of course, in the meantime, I also cover a bit of word formation because word formation is very important. In almost all the books, whether it's opinion advantage or both views, I always include word formation. It's very important to work on word formation. And here are the exercises that at the end of the book, on the last pages, you'll find the answers. The exercises are quite interesting. Right after that, from page 33 to page 37, the grammar appears as applied to IELTS, not in isolation. I explain all the verb tenses. Let's go to page 33. Sorry, I explain all the verb tenses in introductions. It's important for you to know what kind of time expressions and what kind of verb tenses you're going to use for those time expressions. This is very important. The present perfect, I show it there for trends, well-constructed conclusions, and I use unless and otherwise. Why? Because it's very important to argue, and you need to have structures to support your arguments. We can't just write randomly. So this goes up to page 36, 37. Now moving on to chapter 10, which is the section we'll be discussing in detail over on page 38 of your book. From 37 to 44, between these pages, the book covers word formation again, right? And there are a lot of word formation exercises within the problem solution topics. Here, the student learns to vary vocabulary within problem solution topics. Look, see here? Suffix, base word. It's very important to avoid repetition. Okay? And to demonstrate lexical control. This directly impacts the lexical resource criterion, which is one of the IELTS criteria, and your score can increase significantly. Here you can see, look, educate, education, and how to vary this within your IELTS. And you're really going to need this for reading, listening, etc. On the page. Actually, if you take a look right here on page 43, you will see that there are the exercises listed. And then moving further along into chapter 11 on page 45, you'll find all of the specific questions regarding the IELTS exam, including all the comprehensive work about IELTS, which utilizes everything that's already been thoroughly explained in the sections above. It is actually a really interesting process. There are several specific questions that you will need to answer for yourself. You should see if you have thoroughly covered everything required in your IELTS preparation. It is honestly quite fascinating, okay? and you will find that the correct answers are always located right at the very end of the book. This book. It was designed to be followed in order. If the student reads, practices, does the exercises, understands the logic, they stop writing in the dark and start writing with test strategy. The book also brings many complete models, like the IELTS, big cities, education, social problems, and most importantly, the ICS. All of them are analyzed. I show structure, cohesion, vocabulary, how to avoid generalizations, how to maintain a formal tone. In other words, you don't just read, you learn from the text. In conclusion, who is this book for? This book is for those who have already tried to write and got stuck. They know English but don't know how to structure. They want band 7 plus or higher. They want to understand the reason behind things. It was written the way I teach in class. Exactly how I like to teach in class, step by step. Here, for example, plural, very important. Subject verb agreement. It was written step by step without skipping stages, without beating around the bush. If you follow the book in order, sentence by sentence, you will achieve the score you've been dreaming of. I hope you like it. And if you want to buy this book, you can go to Amazon, where it's available for sale. But it's also for sale on Hotmart. And from time to time, I run some promotions on Hotmart. I'll leave the link down below. Thank you so much. And don't forget to give it a like. I'm going to talk a lot more about what's inside this book right here on YouTube and much more. A hug.